Hello and welcome to this Desert Island Books episode of the podcast for the Eastbourne Literary Festival. The festival whose mission is to convince you that you are a writer. I'm Russ Miles, a local writer, listener and festival instigator, and in this podcast I'll be chatting to many diverse and interesting writers about the books that inspire them, the books that have great meaning in their lives, and sometimes perhaps the books that they just want to lambast as being the worst thing they've ever read. Who knows? We'll see where we go. Today on the island, we are joined by Charles Humble. Again, Charles has been welcomed back to the podcast. Charles is a former software engineer, architect and CTO. He was editor-in-chief at online publication InfoQ from 2014 to 2020 and was chief editor for Container Solutions Technology Consultancy from 2020 to 2023. He writes regularly for many publications, is a highly experienced content strategist, and has spoken at many international conferences. Most recently, Charles has published The Developer's Guide to Cloud Infrastructure, Efficiency and Sustainability, and he's a value member of the Software Inklings community on LinkedIn. Charles, welcome to the island.
Thank you, Russ. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to be back on the show. That's a real unexpected bonus. So, thank you. I'm looking forward to this. I'm a little nervous. I'm wondering what I might give away, but I'm very much looking forward to it and sharing just some of my favourite books. So I'm honoured.
It's so nice to have a friend come back and talk about books, whereas before we were talking a great deal about writing. So a new format, new thing to focus on, and hopefully so many more stories that you'll regret sharing with us. And we'll go ahead and look at editing things before publication. Okay. Yes. So starting with your first book, which is a classic, known, I'm sure, by many of our audience. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame is your first choice. Can I ask why? What is it that speaks to you about Wind in the Willows, and what does it mean to you?
So it's a childhood. My father was an actor, fairly briefly professionally. He was in rap theatre for a few years. And then he always said to my sister and I that basically he realised he wasn't going to be the next Laurence Olivier and thought he should do something else with his life, which I think in a way gives you the mark of the man. I think he wanted to not make us feel guilty that he'd kind of given up on something. And I strongly suspect the reality was he realised he needed, like a proper job that paid proper money. But he used to read bedtime stories to us, as so many of us do. And his acting skills never left him. So he was a fantastic reader of stories. And I remember Winnie the Pooh books, laughing out loud, like till my sides hurt, listening to Piglet Finds a Heffalump or something like that. So that could possibly have been my choice. But I went with The Wind in the Willows. It's another book that I loved from my childhood. It's also a really interesting book. It's a book that I think everybody feels like they know. And we all know, the sort of ratty-moly toad stories. And we can all quote little bits of it, like, believe me, my young friend, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats, those sorts of things. Or poop, poop. These are all things we kind of know. What's interesting about it is there's a whole second book in there. So there are these alternative chapters which are effectively sort of lyrical meditations on certain aspects of life. So you get chapters on home life, you get chapters on river life, and you get a chapter on childhood itself. And the childhood chapter itself, which is called Piper at the Gates of Dawn and is also the name of Pink Floyd's first album, not a coincidence, is very odd and very beautiful. But what I remember about it as a child was this slight feeling of, that was weird and strange and a little bit exciting and a little bit unsettling. And then, I'll be honest, I hadn't read the book until about 18 years ago. And then I read it. So one of my children's godparents gave the book to my eldest child, and it became one of our bedtime stories. And reading it again as an adult was a real surprise, because I remember it being just pure joyfulness, like just utterly joyful and funny and charming. And it's all of those things. But it is also quite wistful in places, really quite melancholic in places, much more subtle than I realised, and something really quite special, I think. So it's one of those books, if you liked it as a child and haven't looked at it since, treat yourself. Go and read it as an adult, and it might surprise you. It certainly surprised me. I've actually marked a section from the Piper at the Gates of Dawn chapter, so if you like, I can have a crack at reading it out loud, if that would be a good thing to do. But as I say, it's just a beautiful book, I think.
I think I'd love you to read out in just a moment, if I may. I've just got a couple of questions on what you've shared with us there. I love the thought of your father turning on the inner thespian and having that moment in the limelight at home to deliver some of the characters from Wind in the Willows. That is a beautiful sort of pseudo memory for me, but a very true memory for you. Was there a particular memory or even perhaps a piece of the book that you treasure that he would enact? Is there anything you can remember of that fidelity? It's maybe a long time ago.
It is a long time ago. The bit that I remember is the point at which the motor car first enters. So there is a scene where they're all out travelling in a caravan. So the Toad of Toad Hall has bought a caravan that's, fitted out with all the latest mod cons, and they're going along the road and they get overtaken by a motor car and everything gets scattered everywhere. This is a very old memory, but my memory is sort of Ratty standing in the road, sort of yelling "Roadhog" at the car, and the Toad is just absolutely mesmerised and thinks this is the most exciting thing he's ever seen. And that's the beginning of this whole story of him and his kind of reckless addiction to motor cars. He's a very kind of willful character. And so my father's reading of that, I remember vividly as being both just really funny, and that's where the whole sort of poop thing comes from. It's the noise of the motor car's horn. And him reading that, which I'm afraid I really can't do justice to that because I'm just not an actor. But that's the thing that I remember most from it. But also there are some just other lovely moments. There's the very early bits with the mole character kind of doing his spring cleaning, and he gets to a point where he's sort of like, stuff for spring cleaning. Again, that's not quite the quote, but it's something like that. And that whole scene is just very beautifully realised, I think. And yes, his ability to do the acts. He did Badger very well, I remember. And Badger's this sort of slightly gruff, slightly pompous character, and he does Badger very well. And just charming. He was very good at that. He was a wonderful father, of course. And it was just terrific. So yes, that's kind of how I remember it from my own child.
I love that as something we can give all the fathers and mothers out there to say, read to your children, because these are the memories, these are the ones that come from it. Those memories are never going to come from yet another YouTube swipe right experience. So yeah, absolutely wonderful. Just before before I encourage you to give us a sample of the Piper at the Gates of Dawn, I did just want to, it's something that I noticed, because you and I both work in technology, one way or another, and I've often thought there's a really good metaphor, or probably an allusion to be made to Toad, and the way the industry behaves. Yet another new technology comes down the road, and suddenly one of us, technical people amongst us, are like, ooh, that changes everything.
Yes.
Without much consideration for consequence or obsession. Is that something you see as well?
Yeah, I always think of him slightly as a bit of a sort of Nigel Farage type character as well. One of those sort of, wearing a tweed jacket and being, well, like Nigel Farage. But yes, I know what you mean. There is that sort of slight thing. And I think part of what makes the book so interesting is there is also this kind of melancholic wistfulness. And I think part of that is a longing for an England that is kind of vanishing. I'm desperately trying to remember when it was written and published. It's sort of 1908-ish, I think. I think I've got that right. And I think it's a little bit like Tolkien, actually. I think you can see it in Tolkien as well. There's slight sense of the sort of Industrial Revolution and that creeping of change. And there's definitely a degree to which that's not a thing that we want. I mean, again, there's a moment where the mole asks the rat about the wild woods, which is, one of the sort of these almost becomes a character. It's full of weasels, but it becomes a character. And the rat replies something like, beyond the wild wood comes the wide world, and that's something that doesn't matter either to you or to me. I've never been there, and I'm never going, and nor should you either, if you've any sense at all. So there's that sort of slight feeling of, that kind of looking back. There's a story that Toad himself was based on Alexander, or inspired by Alexander, who was the author's rather troubled son. It's actually a desperately sad story, but so there's some suggestion that he was the inspiration. So yes, I know what you mean about the tech thing. I think we all have that bit. I think it's quite a human thing for a lot of us to kind of chase the new shiny thing, and yes, that's very much Toad, I think.
Yes, to chase the new. Sometimes with not really seeing what's at our feet, and it's quite beautiful. But yes, I'm with you completely. Okay, so I think it's time. I think I've been holding things back long enough. I
will give this a go. I'm a bit nervous about doing this, but I will give it a go. So just for a tiny little bit of context. So what happens in this chapter is one of the otters goes missing. So he's a baby otter that goes missing called Paulie. And Paulie goes missing a lot. So initially no one's terribly worried. And then they get more and more worried because he doesn't reappear. And there's this idea that he's maybe gone over the weir or something. And, terrible things have happened. And so the rat and the mole go off on the river to look for him. And that starts like, a typical sort of Wind in the Willows chapter. And then there is this sort of very extraordinary shift in tone that happens, and it picks up this almost sort of religious, dreamlike quality. And I'm just going to try and read a little bit of it to give you a flavour of it. This is the place of my song dream, the place the music played to me, whispered the rat, as if in a trance. Here, in this holy place, here if anywhere, surely we shall find him. Then suddenly the mole felt a great awe fall upon him, an awe that turned his muscles to water, bowed his head, and rooted his feet to the ground. It was no panic terror. Indeed, he felt wonderfully at peace and happy. But it was an awe that smote and held him, and without seeing he knew it could only mean that some august presence was very, very near. With difficulty he turned to look for his friend, and saw him at his side, cowled, stricken, and trembling violently. And still there was utter silence in the populous bird-haunted branches around them, and still the light grew and grew. Perhaps he would never have dared to raise his eyes, but then, through the piping was now hushed, the call and the summons seemed still dominant and imperious. He might not refuse, were Death himself waiting to strike him instantly, once he had looked with mortal eye on things rightly kept hidden. Trembling he obeyed and raised his humble head, and then in the utter clearness of that imminent dawn, while nature, flushed with fullness of incredible colour, seemed to hold her breath for the event, he looked in the very eye of the friend and helper, saw the backward sweep of the curved horns gleaming in the growing daylight, saw the stern, hooked nose between the kindly eyes, and were looking down on them humorously while the bearded mouth broke into a half-smile at the corners, saw the rippling muscles on the arm that lay across the broad chest, the long supple hand still holding the panpipes only just fallen away from the parted lips, saw the splendid curves of the shaggy limbs disposed in majestic case on the sward, saw last of all, nestling between his very hooves, sleeping soundly in entire peace and contentment, the little, round, podgy, childish form of the baby otter. All this he saw for one moment, breathless and intense, vivid on the morning sky, and still, as he looked, he lived, and still, as he lived, he wondered. "Rat," he found breath to whisper, shaking, "are you afraid?" "Afraid," murmured the rat, his eyes shining with unutterable love. "Afraid? Of him? Oh, never, never, and yet, Mole, I am afraid."
Thank you so much. How beautiful. And I can say that I think perhaps your father would be looking down and saying, that was a pretty good performance, son.
Thank you.
It was indeed, particularly the whispering. You had us enraptured then at that moment. It's wonderful.
It's just beautiful writing. And then it sort of switches back to being, probably what you remember, like 6 paragraphs later, but it's just kind of extraordinary. So there is this very sad backstory so these, like so many of these things, these were stories that he wrote for his son, Alexander, who's also called Mouse. He's what they called a sickly boy and was ill a lot, and very, very sadly committed suicide, aged 20, while at Oxford. And I think these were published afterwards, and Grahame, the author, didn't want to publish them. I think he felt they were far too sort of personal and private to publish, and was kind of eventually persuaded to do so. So I think one of the things that slightly informs the text is, yes, there's a lot of joy and laughter and just fun, but there's also this sort of undercurrent there, borrowing a river metaphor, that makes it something very special, makes it something a little bit more than just a children's book. As I say, if you've not read it in a while, it's worth a reread. It's quite a special book, I think.
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. So book 1 goes With You to the Island, The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, a classic, but I think thank you for your explaining what it means to you, because I think it gives a whole new life to that book, and I hope everyone rushes out to get a copy, or finds perhaps that dusty copy somewhere in their house, if they can happen to find it, which I always struggle. Okay.
You and me both.
Moving to book 2, Last Chance to See, Douglas Adams and Mark Carwardine. I think I'm getting that right.
I think it's Carwardine, but we'll go with it.
Okay, I was hoping someone might correct me. Thank you. So what does it mean to you, this wonderful book?
So I love Douglas Adams. I loved his science fiction. He only published, I think it was 7 novels in this. I read all of them and all the newspaper articles I could get my hands on and everything. I read this book for the first time, I think it was 1990, and I think that's the year it came out. And I was between school and university, and I was travelling across Canada for a couple of months, and I picked it up, I think, in a bookshop in Toronto or something. So I read it while travelling, and it's a travel book. I love the way Douglas Adams writes. I think it sounds like a silly thing to say we don't take comic novelists seriously enough, but I think he's maybe our finest ever comic novelist, and we've had a few. Woodhouse, who Adams always cites as an influence, is an absolute master. Obviously, people like Pratchett, is also very fine. I think Adams's ability to turn a phrase is just really special. And I think this book did a couple of things for me. I think it awakened a desire to travel to more interesting and far-flung places. And when my wife and I got together, so my wife is from Kenya, and I think part of the reason that I fell in love with her is because she kind of brought that side of me out. And so she and I, before we had our children, did quite a bit of travelling together. I mean, obviously to various African countries, as you might expect, but also to places like, Madagascar, New Zealand, Australia, Peru. And I think those were all places that I probably wouldn't have gone to without her. So in a way, I think the book sort of maybe connects to that story in my life of meeting a wonderful human and falling in love and all of that stuff. The other thing with this book for me is I'm something of an environmentalist, sort of, kind of. That's not what I do professionally, but it's something I care about and talk about. I'm very interested in conservation, and a lot of conservation books and a lot of environmental books are very well intended and very worthy, and their audience is conservationists and environmentalists, and it's like swinging to the choir. This is not that book. First of all, it's very funny, which when you consider it's a book about, species going extinct, it could not be very funny. It is very funny. It has a wider audience than anything else really on conservation. But I think also because he sees it in such a different way, I think it's actually quite an important book, because I think it awakened for a lot of people that sense of, gosh, there's something important going on that we ought to care about. So for my wife and I, he talks about going and looking for a creature called the eye, and the eye is a lemur which lives, as all lemurs do, in Madagascar, and it's a very odd sort of gremlin-like creature. It's actually believed by some of the people in Madagascar to be a sort of harbinger or a bringer of death. It's a very peculiar creature, and it was like I had to go to Madagascar, and one of the reasons I had to go to Madagascar is because I had to try and find one. We didn't find one. We did look. But it prompted me to go to Madagascar, which is a place I absolutely fell in love with. It's an island that sort of got under my skin and one I have an absolute burning desire to go back to. He also talks about Fiordland in New Zealand, and that was another place we went, and it was our Christmas present to each other that year. So we were travelling over Christmas, and we kind of bought a helicopter flight above Fiordland, which we could ill afford. But it was just wonderful. So Adams's description of it, which kind of gives you a sense of his phrase, he says, if you took the whole of Norway, scrunched it up a bit, shook out all of the moose and reindeer, held it 10,000 miles around the world and filled it with birds, you'd be wasting your time because it looks very much as if someone has already done it. Which is just fabulous. And then he goes on to say that it's a vast tract of mountainous terrain that occupies the southwest corner of South Island, New Zealand. It's one of the most astounding pieces of land anywhere on God's earth, and one's first impulse standing on a cliff top surveying it all is simply to burst into spontaneous applause, which is just fabulous. So he writes about the landscapes really well. He writes about the human interactions, the terrible troubles with border guards. There's one scene where he says something along the lines of, the guard confiscated my laptop because he thought I might overthrow the government with it, and confiscated my magazine on cars because he quite liked cars. And it's, again, if you've travelled in these kind of places, you'll know that feeling. His descriptions of the animals are just wonderful. So there's one particular parrot called the kakapo, and the kakapo is a great green, fat, flightless parrot. And he describes it as a bird out of time. He says if you look one in its large, round, green-brown face, it has a look of severely innocent incomprehension that makes you want to give it a hug and tell it that everything will be all right, though you know it probably won't be, which is just glorious. He also says that it's a bird that not only seems to have forgotten how to fly, but also forgotten that it has forgotten how to fly, so that a seriously worried kakapo will sometimes run up a tree and jump out of it, whereupon it flies like a brick and lands in a graceless heap on the ground. So it's that ability to just turn phrases and make you laugh and sort of fall in love with these creatures. There's a whole description about the mating ritual of the kakapo, which again is one of the funniest things I've ever heard. They have this extraordinary booming sound they make, which is completely non-directional. So it travels for miles, but you've no idea where it's coming from. And, when there are a lot of them, it doesn't matter very much. But when you're down to the last few, this is quite a problem. And it's just glorious. But then he also does this thing sometimes where he'll have a phrase that just brings you up. So he talks about, there's a long section about the extinction of the dodo. And he says at one point, it's easy to think that as the result of the extinction of the dodo, we are now sadder and wiser. But there's an awful lot of evidence to suggest that we are merely sadder and better informed. Which again is it's gloriously written. As I say, it could be desperately sad, and in some ways it kind of is, but I think it's kind of also just more than that. It's beautifully written, and I think it's a hugely important book, certainly a hugely important book to me. And I think sometimes with life in general, I think one doesn't necessarily make the connections going forward, you can only make them looking backwards. And I sort of feel like this book, as I say, it awakened a desire for travel. I think it reignited something in me about the environment that's turned out to be an important strand in my life. And I feel it as a connection to my wife of now 25 years or so. So, for all of those reasons, it's a book I love dearly. Plus it's Douglas Adams, and I just adore Douglas Adams. I don't think he wrote a bad word in his whole life. He's also hysterical because he famously hated writing. So he's one of those people that he wrote brilliantly, but he loathed every bit of it as far as I can work out. So you've got that whole thing, which those of us who are writers, even, sort of fairly casually like me, can probably relate to. So for all of that, it's just fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous.
I can't even think of another question to apply. I feel like I cheapen the explanation of this incredible book. But I can certainly reinforce, I suppose. I used to call it the crescendo of Douglas Adams. When he writes a sentence or he writes a paragraph, there was this sense that it was either an incredible moment of humour or it would be an incredible moment of feeling. There was always a sense that the sentence was building to something and you were waiting for it, and that was always to me what Douglas Adams could do, that I just don't know how he did so consistently and naturally and over again with what looked like ease. Perhaps it wasn't, given his relationship to writing generally. And I also think I love his quote of, what is it? I love the sound of deadlines, of the sound they make as they pass.
Yes, the whooshing noise they make as they go past.
Whooshing noise. That's it. Yeah.
Yes.
So clearly he didn't do well with the daily commitment of words and all those things that are the disciplined writer's lot, should we say?
Not at all. I think one of his editors described, basically having to go around to his house and sit there so that he would produce anything at all, because otherwise he just wouldn't write. He himself talked about, taking a lot of baths rather than writing and all of this sort of thing. I think he was a master procrastinator. There's actually another bit in the book which I can't quite remember, but he's trying to work out the size of a nest, and he ends up writing a whole piece of software with, drop-down menus and the whole thing to calculate the size of the nest, which would mean that if he ever had to calculate the size of the nest again, which obviously he would never do, would save him a whole lot of time next time. And again, those of us that are technologists can probably relate. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful book. I think he himself, I believe I'm right in saying, he himself felt it was his best book. And for a man who writes so many extraordinary pieces of writing, I kind of concur. I love them all, but I think it's probably my favourite of his.
Fantastic. Well, we'll leave that one there. That one's going off with you to the island. You've got 3 more spaces left in your carry-on luggage. And the third book is The Passion by Jeanette Winterson. So I see you once again, those of you that can't see, I think no one can see Charles right now, but you can almost see the heart-rendering beauty of whatever he's going about to say. So tell us about The Passion.
So this was my university book. This was my first year of university. I read English literature at university, which was an odd choice because I'm dyslexic. And so I was told I might have told the story last time, I can't remember, but I was told by an English A-level teacher that I shouldn't read English, so I did, because I thought it would annoy him. So in our first year, we studied different types of literary criticism, so, sort of practical criticism, formalism, structuralism, deconstructionism, all of those kind of things. And we also studied the novel as a form. So we started with, the real proto-novels, the sort of Tristram Shandies and those kind of things, through Mary Shelley, Jane Eyre, to sort of early 20th century, so Virginia Woolf, Angela Carter, Knights of the Circus, another incredible book. And then the last book on the course was The Passion. So The Passion was written in 87, I believe, and I read it for the first time in 91. I'm not a big rereader. I read most books that I like about twice. And I think I have this sort of pet idea that it's because it took me a long time to learn to read. It's the dyslexia thing. So I didn't really read for pleasure until probably I was about 13, 14, somewhere around there, because it was just really hard work for me. And I think I've kind of had this sense all of my life that I'm trying to catch up. And there are all these other things I want to read. And so I don't normally read a book very often. I probably read this book 3 or 4 times at university. I've probably read it at least 8 or 9 times since. It is my favourite novel by my favourite living author, by a country mile. It's not even close. So let's try and talk about this book. Talking about this book is actually really hard. So it's sort of historical fiction in the loosest possible sense. Really, the only historical bit is it's set in Napoleon's Europe. It's sort of a love story. It's sort of surreal. It's sort of a fairy tale. It has bits of magic realism in it. I think the time that it's written is quite relevant. So it was written during, Margaret Thatcher's Britain. So you had lots of new money and lots of sort of ostentatious displays of wealth. And I think that background is there. You have 2 narrators. So it's effectively kind of being narrated by alternate voices. So you don't have an omniscient narrator, you have unreliable first-person narration, effectively. One of the characters, and again, you're going to have to forgive my dreadful pronunciations at this point, because I can't do an accent to save my life. One of the characters is a French boy called Henry, or Henri, who is essentially a French farm boy, who goes and joins Napoleon's army and becomes Napoleon's chef. One of the jokes in the book at the beginning is that the only thing the only thing that Napoleon really cares about is chicken. And so there's sort of that to it. The other character is this extraordinary woman called Villanelle, who is a prostitute. She's travelling with the army as a prostitute. She has flame red hair. She also has webbed feet, which is just this wonderful device because she's from Venice. So all the Venetians have webbed feet so they can sort of travel around on the canals like ducks, which maybe gives you a little bit of a flavour for it. It's quite short. It's only about 170 pages. I would say there isn't a word I would change. It is incredibly intricate. It is incredibly beautifully interconnected. It's very strange in places. It has moments of absolute horror. There's a description of one of the sort of chicken storehouses that lives in my head and has done ever since I first read it. That I just, it's like a proper horror moment. And there are some other moments in the army sections that are pretty grim. It is, as the name implies, kind of a treatise about love and about passion, and not just erotic passion, but also passion in the sort of religious sense. It's quite a hard book to quote from because it's so intricate and because it's so interconnected. There are a couple of lines. So there's do it from the heart or not at all, which is a line that I kind of try and live by, which I think is beautiful. There's a sort of recurring line, which is, I'm telling you stories, trust me, which I think is beautiful. And there's one long section where they're talking about love that just about works out of context, which is, how is it that one day life is orderly and you are content? A little cynical perhaps, but on the whole just so. And then without warning you find the solid floor is a trapdoor, and you are now in another place whose geography is uncertain and whose customs are strange. Travellers at least have a choice. Those who set sail know that things will be not the same as they are at home. Explorers are prepared, but for us who travel along the blood vessels, who come to the cities of the interior by chance, there is no preparation. We who are fluent find life is a foreign language. Somewhere between the swamp and the mountains, somewhere between fear and sex, somewhere between God and the devil, passion is. And that way is sudden, and the way back is worse.
How good is that?
It's kind of magic, isn't it? And it's like, it's the most extraordinary book. And it's all these sort of, it's like this whole sort of city of the mind. It's a very kind of internal book. And that sort of classic cliche of the purpose of art is to hold a mirror up to life. Adams, actually, who we mentioned earlier, says there simply isn't a mirror big enough, which always makes me laugh. But I think in a very odd way, you see yourself reflected in this book at various times. You see little echoes of yourself, sort of almost out of the corner of your eye. It is just the most wonderful book. As I say, it's my favourite book. I had the immense privilege of meeting Winterson very briefly, probably for like 2 minutes. She was giving a lecture on the wasteland at Southwark Cathedral, which is sort of loosely connected to the wasteland. And the lecture itself was just extraordinary and dizzying and dazzling, and her intellect and her knowledge was just astonishing. And afterwards I took my extraordinarily battered 1991 copy of The Passion and asked her to sign it, and spoke to her for about probably 2 minutes, and it was every bit as joyful as you hoped, really. People always say don't meet your heroes, but honestly she was just delightful, which is maybe another little corner of it. But it's just, as I say, it is my favourite book. I think it sounds weird to say I connected to a book about, Venetians with webbed feet, but I really did, and I still do. That's all I have, but it's just incredible. One other, that's like a one-line quote I have to get in, sorry. It's Villanelle talking to Henry, so it's when they're in Venice, so you've got this whole sort of extended water metaphor. And at one point she says to him, if you should leave me, my heart will turn to water and flood away. And in context, it's just, but like I say, it's quite a hard book to quote because it's so interconnected and so intricate. Yeah. All I can say is read it. Give it time. It looks like a book you can rattle off in an hour. You really can't. It's so rewarding. It'll reward every bit of the time you give it. It's just beautiful.
That is so wonderful. I think I love that message there of take it slow with this book. This is worth it, if you like. And also in those snippets you've given us, there's something beautiful about a book that isn't trying to be quoted, but is so quotable because the writing is so good. Whereas sometimes you read a book and you go, I think this is trying to be quoted. It's trying to be reduced to one or two words that are on somebody's presentation slides or something.
Yes.
And that always feels a little bit cheapening. But when you read a book like this, I imagine there's just this sense that you want to quote it. That's the best feeling you can deliver to a reader, is you're going to want to quote this. You're going to become that irritating person that's going to use the quote and then have to explain the quote because no one has read it.
100%. She was hugely ahead of her time, I think. A lot of her writing is just, it's really brave and kind of remarkable, and I just think she's something quite astonishing. So yeah, give that one a shot, definitely.
Well, it goes in the carry-on luggage as well. We have two more to go through. Both of these authors are favourites of mine, so this is going to be fun too for me. The first is 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carlo Rovelli. Now, Carlo has written many books that I'm familiar with, but bizarrely, I don't think this is one I have read. So I'm going to ask you to tell me why this is such a beautiful example of Carlo's work.
So this, again, it's a slight connection to my father and also actually a connection to my youngest. So my youngest, when he was a very young man, or a very young person, fell in love with physics in a way that honestly I never had done really, and saw the kind of beauty of it in a way that I didn't really understand. And I wanted to try and understand that better, and I happened to be at a cricket match with my father, which is something we did a lot, and I mentioned this to him, and he said, "Oh, I've just read this book by Carlo Rovelli, I'll send you a copy, you should read it." And it's the sort of thing one says. I didn't really think of anything of it, and then it arrived a couple of days later. It's essentially a series of articles. It was originally published in an Italian newspaper, so as a book it's about 78 pages long. And I kind of think of it as being like 7 shots of espresso, if you'll excuse the slightly terrible Italian metaphor. But it's these extraordinarily beautiful, dense bits of writing that, for me anyway, kind of captured the beauty and the mysteriousness and the kind of awe-inspiring nature of the physical world in a way that I had never felt it. I'm not sure that it always works. I think there are moments where it maybe is stretching a little far, but I love it. I've read it a couple of times. I've got it on my bedside cabinet to read again. And it's encouraged me to go and re-explore physics, which is something I hadn't done since I was at school. So for that, I'm hugely grateful. And it gave me a connection to my youngest, which was also something I'm very grateful for. So in this 78 pages, he covers Einstein's theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, black holes, the whole architecture of the universe, elementary particles, gravity, and the nature of the mind itself. And in 78 pages, that on its own is pretty impressive. If you've read him, you'll know, but he has this extraordinarily sort of lyrical way of writing. You could say it's slightly florid, but I love it. So the bit that sticks in my head particularly is his description of elementary particles, where he says they combine together to infinity like the letters of a cosmic alphabet to tell the immense history of galaxies, of the immutable stars, of sunlight, of mountains, of woods and fields of grain, of the smiling faces of the young at parties and the night sky studded with stars. And it's just, I don't know, it captures something that is I think, very, very special. I think he's a remarkable writer. I would put this up there with, maybe six easy pieces, The Feynman and perhaps A Brief History of Time, as those sort of, they're not physics books for physicists, really. They're physics books for the layman who is interested in the subject or has a curiosity. But I think it's just a very special book. I think it's beautifully written. And I think it's, as I say, I think it captures something of the awe of the natural world that as I say, I was missing from my life, that I feel it helped me find.
And I love the fact it's brought you that connective experience and tissue and, everything that can go with being closer to your son, as well as being closer to your father and providing that narrative. I think books often do that. They connect us through the generations in ways we don't always see at the time, but it becomes evident when you look back on these things. I agree with you as well about the need for, I would say, complex subjects or complicated subjects to have they're poets. They're poet laureates, if you like. Somebody that can turn it into a passion, turn something that could seem quite dry or fact-orientated. And I sometimes go and look for that in our own industry, in technology, and goes, who's our poet here? And in many respects, I think that's probably, you're a good candidate in that, Charles, yourself. So it's good to see the circular contribution there to Carlo and to Charles, which I believe Carlo is Charles. So I'm just stretching my knowledge there of how names change between cultures. But yes, I think so. From Charles to Charles, 7 brief lessons, go straight in the carry-on luggage. And the last book for us to explore with you is, again, a classic. I believe it's a prize-winning, beautiful book. Booker Prize, I think. Wolf Hall, by the incredible and very sadly missed Hilary Mantel. What does this one mean to you, Charles?
So I have a bit of a confession with this book. So I only read it for the first time last year. We were on a family holiday in Bath, and I was with my eldest, who is a budding historian, is about to do A-levels and hopefully go to university to read history. Again, I was told at school that I wasn't a historian and gave it up as quickly as I could. But also, the one bit of history I studied was the Tudors. So the idea of a book on the Tudors was just like, yawn, no, not doing that. And also because a lot of people have told me I ought to read it, and that always puts me off anything. And actually it's a silly thing really, but I saw an interview with her, and I don't know, I didn't warm to something that she was saying. I thought she was being a bit unkind about somebody unnecessarily or something like that, and that sort of lodged in your head. And then we had a rainy afternoon in Bath, and my eldest and I nipped into a bookshop called Mr. B's Bookshop in Bath, which is like something out of a Harry Potter novel. It is just the most extraordinary place. I was wandering around, and in my head I remember it as this book sort of jumping out of the shelf going, read me, and me catching it. Obviously that didn't actually happen, but that's sort of how it is in my brain. So I started reading it in the shop and went, oh, okay, I was clearly totally wrong about this book because this is clearly something very special. So I bought it and I started reading it on holiday. It's 650 pages long, and it's worth saying it's the first of 3. And what is remarkable about it is you get to the end and you just want to read the next one, which, given that it's quite hard work, I don't mean it's not enjoyable, but it requires quite a bit of you as a reader, I think. That in itself is pretty extraordinary. The core of it is obviously Thomas Cromwell. So he was chief minister to Henry VIII. He oversaw the break with Rome. He also oversaw the dissolution of the monasteries. Cromwell was loathed in his lifetime, like really not a popular person. Mantel manages to make him interesting and even quite appealing. She starts with this miserable child for him, this miserable childhood, I should say, for him, where he's the son of a kind of violent, drunken blacksmith in Putney. And then you fast forward a few years, and when you meet him the next time, he's fluent in multiple languages, he's learned, he's witty, he's thoughtful. He's also very intimidating, so physically he's very intimidating. There's a wonderful moment where Cardinal Wolsey compares him to one of those square-shaped fighting dogs that the low men carry around on ropes, which is a fine phrase. I think it brings that period of history to life in a really extraordinary way. I'm not enough of a historian to judge the accuracy of it, to be truthful, but I get the sense, I mean, she certainly did an enormous amount of research, but it's a book that carries the research lightly. You don't constantly go, oh, you clearly spend a lot of time thinking about that. It's just kind of there. There are moments of absolute horror. There are moments of real poignancy. There's a lot about the deaths of Cromwell's wife and his daughters that is beautifully captured. There's one point that sticks in my head where he is contemplating a gilded star and angel's wings, which would be bought out at Christmas when his children were around. And he says, it's the narrator, I think, that says, this year no one has the heart to hang it up the star, but he visits it in the lightless storeroom. He slides off the canvas leaves that product protect its rays and checks that they are unclipped and unfaded. From a peg hangs angel's wings. He touches them. His fingers come away dusty. He shifts his candle out of danger and lifts them from the peg and gently shakes them. A soft sound of hissing and a faint amber perfume washes into the air. It's sort of wonderfully poignant, I think, and rather beautiful. There's also lots of kind of narrative tricks going on with this very indistinct narrator that you have. So she does this thing of, supposing within each book there is another book, and within every letter on every page another volume constantly unfolding, but these volumes take no space on the desk. Suppose knowledge could be reduced to a quintessence held within a picture, or a sign held within a place which is no place. Suppose the human skull were to become capacious, spaces opening up inside it, humming chambers like beehives. So you have this kind of almost like fourth wall breaking kind of self-referential thing going on. She does a wonderful job of capturing the court politics. Anne Boleyn is a particularly formidable character. I think it made me think about the women in Henry's life in a way that I will say I hadn't thought about them before. Again, not a historian, but that was interesting. And again, bringing us back to the whole family thing, because my eldest is a budding historian, so it's a book that we've been able to talk about a bit. And so that's kind of nice. It kind of brings it all together. It is, I would say, a book that's worth the hype. And given how hyped it has been, that's quite a thing. It's every bit as good as they said it was, which was a surprise to me.
After avoiding it for so long, and it turned out to be one of those, and I had a similar experience. I should point this out as well. This was one of my lockdown books, and in fact the series was a lockdown series for me. And I too found a very strong adjustment to the way it was written in the first few chapters, because it leaves a lot off the table. There are things happening, there are pieces to the scene that you sometimes go, I don't know who just spoke. It's there, it's all there, but you're probably, in my case, I was probably reading too quickly, and I was used to just consuming the matter, but it slowed me down. It made me go, okay, now I'm in this scene, and I'm feeling it differently because I'm being slowed down slightly, and I found that a really good technique. At first frustrating, but then really good. And like you, I found myself wanting the next book and then wanting the next. I'm being very surprised to find myself very sad that the books were going to end, even though it's a bit, just a quick anecdote for you, I suppose. I used to work in a cinema, and nothing made me laugh more than a matinee performance of the film Titanic, where people were going in, and I heard distinctly many times people go, I wonder how it ends. And I used to sit there and go, well, I don't want to give you any spoilers, but I think the boat sinks. And it was a bit like that with historical fiction of this sort, where it is very well known what happens in the end. But the beauty of it is you sit there wanting to avoid those moments. You want things to carry on in some sense. And like you say, Cromwell was not typically, hasn't become presented as a character that anybody is looking forward to meeting in any sort of afterlife. But in this almost homage to this character, to this person, there's so much depth that you cannot help but have a relationship, a connection to this person that and that's got to be great historical fiction as far as I'm concerned. I'm a massive fan of that form as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think she does a wonderful job by Moore as well, Thomas More.
Yes.
When I was studying the period in history at school, I just found him infuriating. Like, surely you can see how this plays out. Why are you doing this? And she makes him very human and very, a man of deep, deep conviction that makes it very understandable in a way that I didn't get, as I say, I didn't get at school, certainly. And so, I think she just does a brilliant job. I think she does a really brilliant job. Yeah, magic book.
We'll leave that there, Charles. So that's your 5 books, and I have to say you will have, I would imagine, broken several scales of measurement in terms of the weight of your carry-on at this point. That last one really did, particularly if you went for the hardback edition. Thank you so much today, Charles, for being the first person to head off to the desert island. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Desert Island Books from the Eastbourne Literary Festival podcast. If you'd like to share the books that mean the most to you, whether they be your earliest reading memory, a book that changed your mind, a book you cannot stop rereading, or even the book that told you that you could be a writer, please get in touch. we'd love to invite you on the show. And with that, I'll say one last time, thank you, Charles, for coming back and sharing such a wealth of beautiful books. And I think the bar has been wonderfully raised for what these episodes should be. So thank you again.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been an absolute joy, as always. Lovely to catch up. Thank you.